I'm joined today by assistant coach from Rice University, Van Green. And coach, my first question for you, which is standard, is have you ever had any personal experience with either unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment or with non-lethal, unconstitutional police brutality? And if so, if you wouldn't mind sharing an example or two for us.
Yeah, I think the one that comes to mind, I've been pulled over many times, first and foremost. I've only received one ticket in my life, ironically. And the one time that I actually received the ticket was actually very alarming and surprising. The young lady that pulled me over was another African-American lady. I would have thought that she wouldn't have had her guard up the way that she did, but it was to the point where I am in the driver's seat. When she walked up on the car, she wouldn't even walk past the back window. She stayed at a distance yelling at me, but had her hand on a pistol the entire time. And so I had at the time I was a GA at Rice. I had the other GA in the car who was white. You know, it was two cops. They asked him, was he okay? They asked me what I had in the back seat. And then it's just the way she was talking to me the entire time and had her hand on the pistol. I was like, ma'am, like, I am not in any way trying to harm you. I'm just trying to have a conversation. And I remember she accused me of going like 12 over the speed limit, which I was on cruise control. I was going 5 over the speed limit. But at that point that I realized she was so confrontational, I said, look, just give me the ticket. I don't mind. I'll pay the fine. I just want to keep my life. That's the only time I've gotten a ticket. But I've been pulled over many times. One time in Alabama, I'm originally from Alabama. So I think Alabama historically is probably the most racist state in the country. There's so many examples of discrimination in the prison system and just the treatment, the legislation. I mean, it's so many different things many problems in Alabama. However, one time I was pulled over, it was probably 11:30 at night. I went to a restaurant. At this time, I was training a good amount. I was potentially going into the G League, and I was trying to stay on this workout and eating regimen. So I'm back home in Alabama, no groceries in the home. I was like, hey, I'm just going to give me a quick meal. I'm starving. It's like 11 p.m. So I drive to go get food. I go into a predominantly white area. I pull down the street, and I know the police officer that saw me. When I saw him look at me, I knew I was going to have a problem. When I got past him, he pulled in behind me. And right when he pulled behind me, I ended up turning right to turn into the restaurant where I had called and ordered the food. But once I turn into the parking lot, he gets behind me and turns the bright lights on me, and he watches me as I walk into the restaurant. So I knew I had a problem because I did not have to wait on my food because I had called it in. So from his perspective, he saw a black man as soon as he pulled in behind him, pulled into the restaurant, act like he got out to go get food. So I went in the restaurant, got my food, came right back out very quickly. He had circled the block and came right back. So now you see me getting back in the car, which you assume, oh, he didn't get food that fast. He probably just got out of the car to make sure that I don't follow him. But hey, I'm still going to circle back and see him as he goes. So I reverse, I pull out, going down the road. And I knew I had a problem when he first saw me. I made sure to go the speed limit, then go 1 over, then go 1 under. Stayed exactly on the speed limit. He would slow down and then drive really fast at my bumper like he was about to hit me. Slow down and drive really fast at my bumper like he's about to hit me. And I'm like, if he hits me, he has to hit me. But I'm not going to speed up, and I'm not going to do anything crazy because I don't want to give him a reason to give me any type of ticket, any type of whatever. So eventually he puts his lights on, he pulls me over. So when he pulls me over, it takes him about 10 to 15 minutes before he actually approaches the car. And I didn't realize this at the time, but when he approached the car, I realized he had called backup. It was like 4 cars out there now. And like they all surrounded my car. So it was about maybe 8 to 10 police officers. I think all of them had their hands on their pistol. When the one cop that stayed behind me, when he walked up to the car, he punched the taillight as hard as he could. And when he punched the car, my first reaction is, why are you punching my car? Like, this is a car I paid money for. I don't want to have any physical damage because you just punched my car. But I had to come back to my senses because even if he cracked my taillight, if he broke my taillight, it is not worth me getting into an altercation with him and my life being in danger. So I assume he punched the taillight to see if he can crack it, have a reason to give me a ticket. I have no idea. But he walked up and he punched it as hard as he could. Walks up to the car. First question is, why are you out? And I said, sir, I'm just hungry. Why are you out so late? my first reaction is I didn't think it was against the law for me to be out this late, but I couldn't say that. So I just said, sir, I was hungry, came out to get food. And I just remember he was like, you can't be out this late. You can't be out this late. He said something else that was kind of discriminatory towards me. But I was like, no problem, sir. I have my license and registration already out. I don't want to reach anywhere. My hands are visible. I'm sick, sir. I can get my ID. It's right here. Hand them the ID, hand them the insurance card. They run all my information. I have nothing on my name, no warrants, anything like that. They take about 10 to 15 minutes. The other guy takes a flashlight. He's going everywhere around the car, looking out in the back seat, the passenger seat, trying to find anything. What's back here? Nothing is back there. Like, I have nothing on me. I just want to go home. And so eventually they let me go. But it was after like me nervous, calling my mom, sweating. Like, I'm trying to make sure that like my life is not in danger over something so minor, just me going to get food. So that's like the most recent one that comes to mind. But yeah, I can't say that me personally, I have been dragged out of a car, beaten by police, nothing like that. But I don't know. I know a few people that have had different encounters with the police. So,
Well, so a couple of points that I want to raise based off what you said for any viewers. One, he mentioned that one of the instances was with a black female officer. And it's important to understand that regardless of your race, you're part of a blue culture.
absolutely.
And you were taught that blue comes first. And so that's the reason why we oftentimes see even black police officers discriminating against black citizens. And so to any of the white people who don't really understand that phenomenon, I just wanted to point that out because a lot of white people almost, coach, will hear that and be like, you see, it's not a racial problem because the officer was black too. And it's important for them to understand that the citizen who's being harassed is black. That's where the culture of racism comes in, regardless of the shade of the blue police officer committing the unconstitutional harassment. And the second thing is, you mentioned Alabama, and anybody watching from other states, just keep in mind the New York Police Department and the Chicago Police Department, the LA Police Department, they're not going to Alabama and Mississippi to recruit. So it may be worse or feel worse in Alabama, but believe me, racism is a national problem. And we oftentimes suffer from self-issued comparative clemency, where we look at ourselves in an enlightened state such as Colorado and say, well, racism is a problem in Alabama, and we consequently deny that racism is a problem in Colorado. Well, I know black people who live in Colorado, and they get pulled over for absolutely no reason, especially after dark, especially in a mostly white neighborhood. I just wanted to point that out. And then, Coach, my follow-up question is, before we get to the kind of free form part, is of your closest circle of black friends, roughly what % of them have had at a minimum, you alluded to some of them have been pulled out of the car, shoved on the hot asphalt face down. Roughly what % of your closest black friends have at a minimum experienced unconstitutional, nonviolent police harassment?
So it's funny, before I answer that, to piggyback on what you said, I went to school in New York City. So I left Alabama to go to Columbia undergrad, and I was there during the time of stop and frisk. So I could be walking with my teammates down the street, and at any given point, a police officer could walk up on us, ask us all these questions, or pin us against the wall and try to feel for any drugs or any type of paraphernalia that they could in any way try to incriminate us. Like, it was just a different time. And I remember walking with a young lady who was not from America. So she truly didn't understand, I guess, the history of America. But I remember talking, and she was like, yeah, if I yell right now, like, no one will come to my rescue. I was like, no, I am a black man. If you yell right now, 4 people will grab me with the quickness. And so I remember her just yelling out. And before I knew it, 3 people had walked up on me, 2 being a cop, like, hey, are you in trouble, ma'am? And I was like, I told her, like, to you, like, in your country, that's probably not a big deal. But when you're walking with a black man, you can't allude to any type of harassment, any type of you're in danger, because they're not going to ask me any questions. Like, it's no, hey, what happened? Defend yourself. No, they're going to grab me, throw me to the pavement, and then they're going to call reinforcement. And it's going to be a problem for me. So, like, I had to kind of, like, enlighten her in that sense. Like, historically, America, no matter what you are, like, it's not necessarily based on let's keep the black man safe. As far as my friends go, It's funny. My friends from Alabama, my friends from New York City are very different. I got into a heated discussion with a friend maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago, and he was comparing his experience. He grew up in Florida, suburban neighborhood, predominantly white. I think he may have been the only black person in his class. Even then, he's a lighter skin tone. His mom's white, dad's black. I mean, he's not as dark complexion as I am, but like he's never been pulled over by the police. He's never had an encounter like that. And so when we were talking about our experiences, like I told the entire Columbia Lions men's basketball team, I've probably been pulled over more than anyone else in this group chat combined. And so it's just a little different when I wasn't as sheltered or protected from it because of my geographical location, because of whatever nuances went into the equation. But it was very different. As far as my Alabama friends, majority of them have been pulled over. Majority of them have been harassed. Majority of them have been pulled out of the car. Police saying they have warrants to check things out, going through their car trying to find something. I want to say my brother had a police officer try to say like some drugs were his. My brother's never been involved in drugs in any type of way. But I would say more than half have had some type of encounter with the police, whether that's being harassed, whether that's being grabbed out of a car, whether that's, you walking down the neighborhood and someone just pulls you over randomly. The area I live now, I run every morning. And every morning I run is a police officer standing at the end of the street just watching me as I run. And it's funny because I always catch them the same route. I'll go around, and because the way I run, I don't jog the entire time. I'll walk then sprint, walk then sprint. I'm a basketball player. I'm used to doing this, not one steady pace. And so I'll go through a neighborhood and I can see like a lady sitting on her porch or on the phone. And when she sees me, she'll run inside, and 30, 45 seconds, even a couple minutes later, there go police officers just slowly creeping through the neighborhood. And they haven't said anything to me yet, thank God, but they will stand right there and just watch me as I'm running through a neighborhood over and over, just because, again, I'm a black man in a wealthier neighborhood, predominantly white. But me and my wife, we already say things now like, I don't go anywhere alone anymore. I don't run alone anymore. I don't go out past like 8 p.m. when it's dark outside. Like, it's just certain things that I can't do because I know it ends badly.
So it sounds like collectively a pretty clear majority of your black friends have at least at some point experienced, at a minimum, unconstitutional nonviolent police harassment. And so I guess the last question is a little bit silly, but the project's called the Not Isolated Project. So white people are always insisting that these issues of police harassment and brutality and murder, that one, white people fail to connect, but they generally often, white people will often say this is just isolated. Do you consider these related, connected problems, the culture that permits this to occur? Do you think it's an isolated thing, or do you think you already said clear majority, so it's kind of a dumb question, but.
I just think, like, I look at, so I was a history teacher for a long time. So teaching our history and really understanding how the principles that America was founded upon, to various eras in history that we have gone through. Majority of the time, like I tell people all of the time, I don't think there's any time that the black community went out of their way to harass or try to hinder the white community. From slavery to mass incarceration, to the Jim Crow era, to the war on drugs, to the burning down of Black Wall Street. I mean, it's so many various examples to persistent police brutality. It's always, we're trying to just have fair equality, live our life without being harmed, without being killed, without being discriminated against. But after we conquer something, there's always something else that we have to overcome. When we abolished slavery, we still weren't equal. Like Civil Rights Act, we still weren't allowed to vote. Like even now, mass incarceration is 1 in every 3 or 4 black men going to jail versus 1 in every 17, 18 white men. It's just so many different things that we always have to overcome. It is not an isolated event. This is how America was founded. These are the principles that America was founded upon. Take the black man, make him do your work. I tell people all the time, go read the Willie Lynch slave letter. It lays it out clearly. If you want to control the black community, you kill the black man, period. And now I'm not surprised that, hey, you want to control the black family, you put the black man in jail. You kill the black man from police brutality. It's so many things. I mean, every day I face some type of discrimination. Like I was I'm sorry that there's in the background, they cutting the grass outside, but if you still can hear me.
I can.
I went to Joseph A. Bank with my head coach, who was a white man. The guy working at Joseph A. Banks, he looks at me and says, "Oh, you brought the help today." And I got mad. I was like, "What do you mean you brought the help?" And then I go back in the same store maybe a week later with my wife, and he asked me, what is your position? I'm one of the younger assistant coaches in the country. I say, hey, I'm an assistant coach. He's like, oh, so you're an assistant to the assistant? I was like, no, I'm an assistant coach. He's like, well, I don't understand. Like, what do you mean? What do you do? I was like, there's a head coach. You have 3 assistants. I'm one of those assistants. And he couldn't understand that. And my wife had to get involved. Like, hey, he is an assistant to the head coach. Like, I know he's black and you don't believe that, but he is. And like, he was so taken aback. And by the end of the conversation, he said, I remind him of Slim Thug. Why do I remind you of Slim Thug? I've never wanted to be a rapper in my life. I've never tried to rap in any kind of way. Like, that's never been my life. But he couldn't understand that I actually went to college, got a degree, and I'm actually in a field and a career that is probably difficult for a lot of minorities to get involved with, but I'm here. And I think that same week, I went to Austin with my wife. I pulled up to a nicer hotel downtown Austin. I get out for valet parking. The clerk looks at me and says, are you sure you're at the right hotel? Yes, I am. I'm positive I'm at the right hotel. Why would you ask me that? And so I tell people all the time, like, I went to Columbia. I have an Ivy League degree. I went to Rice. I have a Rice Master's. That doesn't matter. When I get pulled over, it doesn't matter. When I walk in a room, it does not matter. They see a black face, a black man. I'm 6'3", 220 pounds. I'm always a threat. And I can never, like, and I remember listening to someone say, like, blue lives matter. Don't get me wrong. I completely understand. I would never want to see innocent people lives taken for no reason. However, you can take off that blue uniform. I cannot take off my black skin. You take off that blue uniform, you can go be a regular citizen. There's nothing I can do to ever hide this. So it's different. But no, to answer your question, that was a very long path. It is not isolated. It is pervasive, prevalent. It is everywhere. You can't not see it.
You brought up, I'm really glad you shared those everyday experiences because as we talked about before we technically started the interview, the purpose of these is to talk about how the police culture that permits the unconstitutional harassment, which permits the violence, which permits the murder, that it's connected, and that when you view the culture collectively, it's a universal problem much more than it's an isolated problem.
Right.
But the everyday experiences that you're talking about are critically important. And you said something in a way I hadn't heard it said before. The police officers can take off their uniforms, but you can't take off your skin color.
Right.
And Reuters did a story 5 years ago, something like that, that I included in my book to make the same point of the not isolated projects trying to make. Reuters interviewed 25 black New York Police Department officers and asked them how many of them experienced unconstitutional harassment when they were off duty out of uniform. And it was 24 out of 25. It was 96%.
Yep.
So white people continually insist that, well, it's a socioeconomics thing. They police the trailer parks in North Georgia just as hard as Cabrini Greens in Chicago. And I'm not one to say that socioeconomics is not a factor also. It just pisses me off when white people try to dismiss racism by pretending that socioeconomics is the only factor. When you look at yourself, an Ivy League educated man who experiences racism every single week and have been pulled over. And for those of you who aren't so good at connecting the dots, if Coach Green were getting in trouble all the time and skipping class all the time, he wouldn't have been able to get into Columbia. So let's be clear that he's been dotting his I's and crossing his T's at least since his first day of high school and probably well before that. And yet he's still been pulled over. I think the word he used to describe it was countless times for no reason, right? There's not a curfew. Well, apparently there is if you're black. It's okay to get hungry and have food waiting for you unless you're black. It's okay to check into a nice hotel unless you're black. So I'm really glad that you shared those experiences. And then from here, Coach, it's open forum. What else is on your mind? The last 2 guests turned me into the subject. They said, why do white people do this? And I'm like, well, I can't speak for all of us. But so from here, what's on your mind?
Well, I think a couple things, because I am from Birmingham, Alabama. I'm from a very rough neighborhood. I think by the time I was a sophomore in college, maybe 4 or 5 guys that I grew up with have been shot and killed. But I will say, I never was raised in an environment that it was us versus them. I was raised on Christian principles, a Christian man. It was never divisive. It was always inclusive. It was always, love all, no matter their story, how they look. I mean, the whole nine. And I've had a lot of in my life, as far as mentors, from people who helped me get through college, people who write my recommendations when I apply for a job, the people that I call on for life advice when I was getting married, all of these things. I have a lot of men in my life, and it's probably a 70 to 30 split, 70% being white, 30% being black men. And I have nothing against anyone that has not given me a reason to question their character. But I also understand that it is harder for someone who has never experienced what we experience every day to completely understand. And I tell everyone it's the same example. Like it's the Malcolm X example. I can stab in your back with a 9-inch blade. Because I hear people all the time where, it's better than it was in the 50s and the 60s. If you pull that blade out 3 inches and it's still 6 inches left in my back, I am still bleeding and I am still hurting. I don't understand how you can't see that I am in pain. I don't understand how you can't, like, if you turn on the news, it's everywhere. I mean, do you turn a blind eye? Like, how can you not understand the attack on the black community in America? I talk to people all the time. I struggle with a lot of people who aren't of color, trying to get them to understand what an everyday, what a day is to me. And they really just don't get it. And so I'm really struggling to find the way to explain. I'm trying to find the vernacular, the jargon, whatever it is I need to find to kind of help paint this picture of my pain is a little different from your pain. Yeah, you go through hard times. Everyone has hard times, no matter who you are. But it's just a little different when everywhere I go, I have to always watch my back. Everything that I've always learned is kind of like, hey, swallow your pride, swallow your ego. You can't, speak up too much. You don't want to be the angry black man. And I've always been able to kind of silence myself. But now that everything's in the media and all that pain is now resurfaced, it's much more difficult for me to stay quiet about certain things when I see them. And I don't know, it's really difficult for me because I'm trying to find the words. I'm trying to find the way to kind of paint this idea that this isn't a fair system. It isn't. It's difficult. But a lot of white men just cannot see it. They can't. And I'm trying to find a way to get there, and I haven't found the way yet. I can't paint a picture for them that they can understand. I can't put it in a way that they can comprehend. So I'm struggling. I'm struggling. Every day is a new conversation, but I'm struggling trying to find a way to let them know this is who I am. This is my pain. I know you guys love me, and I know you guys have always been there for me. And from the bottom of my heart, I appreciate that. But how can you not see that I'm hurting?
Well, unfortunately, where one, it shouldn't have to fall on you to convince us to see your full humanity. We should have never needed to be convinced in the first place. And to the extent that we do need to be convinced, it really should be it should be a civil war in the white community. It sucks that it falls on you. And part of the reason why I'm doing these videos with 50% black coaches, 50% white coaches, but also with my thoughts included, is because it shouldn't fall all on you. And I don't know what to tell you. I mean, the words you're saying don't require a whole lot of clarification to me. I can tell you that it's really frustrating to me, and I can't imagine how you feel, that it's like when white people express their pain and trauma, possibly from a past event, the people don't say, get over it. And I mean, sometimes there's tough love, like the suck it up. I know your mom didn't like you, but like the, maybe it's so. I'm not saying there's never anything as tough love, but but at least there's love. Like there's no compassion, no empathy. It's like slavery's a long time ago. Get over it. It's like, man, I'm not upset about it. I don't know any black people really. Now, some of my black friends who sit down and think about slavery and think about, man, my great great grandparents were fucking human beings that they enslaved, that evil people enslaved. And maybe when you sit down and think about it, it feels sad. But my many conversations on the topic, I can't think of a time that a black friend of mine was extremely upset about slavery. It was more like I was driving down the street, or the good stories. My friend Robert Mason, one of my first interviews, they lived in a mostly white neighborhood, and he had like 7 friends over, 6 black, 1 white, and the cops came and guns in everybody when they're in high school, guns in everybody's faces, handcuffed everybody but the white kid, whose house it wasn't, and kept telling him, this is what happens when you bring these kinds of people into this neighborhood. And it wasn't even his house. And high school kid's not supposed to have a gun put in his head by a cop for having a couple of friends over to his own house. This was not some late night party with alcohol and drugs and 200 people, right? This was a small handful of high school kids hanging out at one of their homes. You can't get a lot more normal than that. So, I don't know how to tell you how to express it any better than you just did. I thought you expressed it perfectly. I wish like hell that I knew I could give you advice. And I especially wish that I didn't fucking need to. And I especially wish that you didn't need to. So I don't know.
It's the 2 final things I'm gonna say is, one, I understand that, a lot of people that I talk to, they kind of struggle because their thing is, well, I wasn't the one to put anyone in slavery. And you're absolutely right. You didn't physically go out and put anyone in slavery. However, you benefit from this nation in a way that I will never. Like, you are privileged in a way. And like, I understand it's hard for you to see it, but you are privileged in a way that it's hard for me to try to get to where you are. And like my good friend from Colombia, he had an analogy. He said that we're all running a race. We're all running the same race. And the goal is to get to 100%. As a white man, you may start at 35 or 40. As a black man, I'm starting at 0. And so, like, yeah, the goal is to get there, but it's so much more that we have to overcome in pursuit of that goal. That is, sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes it's tiring. A lot of times I feel dejected and scared. But I don't know, that's just this is the country that we live in. But it's to the point now that I'm questioning, do I even want to have a son? I can't protect my son. My mom calls me all the time because she's concerned. I cannot protect my son as a black man. I can tell him what to do, but as we've seen many videos in the media, you can do exactly what they ask you to do, and it doesn't matter. Your life can be taken like that. And the last point I want to make is, when I told you I got into a heated discussion with my good friend from Colombia, he was saying, I don't see why the looting, the rioting, the protesting, why that's beneficial at all. And like I told him, I do not condone going out burning buildings. I don't condone the violence. I don't condone any of that. And I would never tell anyone to go do that. I was always, that MLK, non-violence, we're peaceful. We try to get a message across, but we're peaceful. But like I told him, if you look at what we've done historically, even Martin Luther King Jr., him and his peaceful approach, peaceful perspective, he was thrown in jail and labeled a terrorist. You see Colin Kaepernick, who tried to take a knee and do it the right way, not try to go above and beyond, not try to cause so much of a scene, just did something peacefully, and that wasn't effective. That wasn't a way. That was disrespectful. And now you see people who are just fed up with no type of direction, just doing what they have to do. And I get it. A lot of people sit back and question why. And I tell them all the time, you give us a better alternative and a better solution, I'm sure they'll try it, but nothing has worked historically. So,
I'm sorry, I thought you were finished. Go ahead. I thought you were finished, Coach. Go ahead. I cut you off.
That's it.
So a couple things there. One, remember that MLK never harshly condemned. There were protests that devolved into riots. when he
Absolutely.
was leading the movement too. And he never, ever harshly condemned any of that.
Like he said,
He
when you're
said riots are the voice of the unheard. Essentially, like, I don't condone it per se, but nor will I condemn it.
Yep.
And the analogy I like to use there is, if we're hanging out on a corner, okay, and we're buddies, and you flick my ear a couple times, go, hey man, knock it off. I know that's you. And then you maybe flick my ear again or pop me in the back of the head. I go, Van, stop it. I said, please, and you keep doing it. Eventually, I haul off and I whack you in the head. Well, that's your fucking fault, not mine. I asked as nicely as I could for a long time, and you wouldn't listen. And so, to the white people who feel upset or disgusted with the riots and the looting and the arson, my thing to that is, you should have listened in the first place, and that's the same thing that you already said. And now on privilege, I do actually have some advice to explain the topic to white people that drops their defensive. I wrote a whole chapter on this specific topic. I did not try to advise black people how to speak to white people in the book, but I did discuss privilege. So I point out it's a broader topic, okay? We both have big privilege, right? We were not born 5'6". This meant that we were more likely to be good at sports, which meant we were less likely to get bullied, which meant girls were more likely to like us, and right on down the path, right? And so we both benefit from big privilege. That's something that we were born with. We had nothing to do with, right? And when you start off by going through, there's like hundreds of different, we both have, although our nation unfortunately doesn't treat you like a full citizen, we both do have a degree of nationality privilege, because there are things here, like public schools, that are a lot better in, say, Guatemala, or Czechia, right? And so there's, even though, again, we have not done the job yet of recognizing your citizenship, there is still nationality privilege involved, because there are things about America that are just more advanced and better, right? Like, there are countries where you can't get high-speed internet. We couldn't be having this Zoom call. Right. And that's, a degree of nationality privilege. So when I start there, that's broader, then it doesn't feel like an attack.
Right.
And it shouldn't in the first place. And then the other thing I try to get through on this is that, I wish the brand were black burden, because it's not really about the small unearned advantages white people have. It's about the disadvantages that you face, right? No one's trying to make things harder for white people. We're trying to make things fair for black people.
Right.
And so when I talk about how maybe it's not the best brand, right? Here's the, like, white privilege is you don't have people fuck with you at a nice hotel for no reason, right? I do. That's my burden as a black man. That's black burden. Your white privilege is not having that burden. But again, starting off by talking about how privilege is a very broad topic, that tends to be like, oh, okay. Like, it's like so food for thought on the narrow topic of privilege. Maybe that can,
I like it.
Those thoughts can help you out. So
one that I definitely throw out there, see what happens. I mean, I haven't been successful up to this point, so. Yeah,
it's when I first heard that term. So my book was called Recovering Racist. I didn't say recovered. I think that every white person was brainwashed by previous generations, television, the whole 9 yards. And conquering brainwashing at the personal level is not an uncomplicated task, right? And so I still think of myself as a racist, but there's a 1 to 10 scale, and I'm not a 7 or a 9. Right. I'm much lower. But I still consider myself to be a racist, and I think that's critical, because we're never going to fix a problem we can't admit exists. And so what I'm calling on the white moderates to do is, when you have a racist thought pop into your brain reflexively that you didn't choose to have, self-check. Recognize that the thought you just had wasn't cool. Absolutely. And redirect. That's what I do. And over the course of the last, I've been at this for a while, since like 88. But like I still will have those reflexive, right? Well, now they happen, whatever, a couple times a month, and I self-check.
Right.
Whereas 20 years ago, they're probably happening a couple times a day. And I probably wasn't self-checking as much as I should have been.
Right.
And so to any white people watching, just monitor yourself, because really we talk about institutional racism, and that's the most important, because that's where the power imbalance affects the lives of Black people. It's just that our institutions, for the most part, are not racist on paper. They're racist because of the individual racists who have their hands on the levers of power. And so to me, it's incumbent upon us as white people to try as hard as we can to self-check and fight our own inner racist. Because really, like, for example, it's not legal to give preferential treatment to a white borrower, right? If a Black man and a white man walk in with the same tax returns and the same credit score, it's against the law. There are federal laws prohibiting the bank from discriminating. And
Right.
yet in 2011, Bank of America had to pay a $335 million fine based on rampant discrimination. Why? Because of the individual white racists working inside of the institution.
Right.
And so I'm just calling on any white people watching. Number one, it's okay to say the words, I'm a racist. I don't hate Black people. I don't wish ill on Black people. But as long as I can look at one Black person's behavior and I attach race to the individual's behavior, I'm being a racist. As long as I think about people collectively, I'm being a racist. If I say, well, Black people do blank, it could be something that's not negative. Black people jump higher. That's racist. Because Rex Chapman doesn't think so. And I'm thinking about Black people as a monolith.
Right.
As one. That's racist. It doesn't mean, it's not a hateful thing to say Black people jump higher. Right. It is a racist thing. And
Right.
we as white people have got to admit it, because we can't fix it if we can't admit it. So.
Well, look, man, I appreciate your time. I do have to get to a meeting at 4 o'clock. So hate to cut it short, but if we can pick this up another time, if you want to continue, man, let me know. I'm more than willing.
Yeah, these may turn into, this was a specific project in mind to try to convince white people that the problems of racism in the United States of America are definitely not isolated. They are real and they are normal, so normal that they become normalized psychologically to a lot of Black people, which is, incredibly sad that it's that normal. Right. So if I do keep going with this after the project ends and do some long form podcasts, I'd love to have you back on, because
my pleasure.
Pretty obvious you've got a lot more to say.
It'd be my pleasure, man.
I appreciate you, Coach. Thank you so much.
We'll talk soon.
Okay.